Hello, I'm Eoin Woods from Endava. Today we're going to talk about smart automation and the impact it can have on your business. I'm the CTO of Endava. We're a software engineering company that delivers solutions for clients in the areas of digital, agile and automation from our centers in Europe and the Americas. My job at the firm is to set our technical direction, guide the development of our capability and work with our biggest clients to make sure we're delivering effective solutions for them. And as part of this, I oversee our smart automation work. We've been doing automation for a long time. It's been very effective and it's had a big impact on most enterprise environments. Today, most enterprises are very dependent on the effective automation solutions that we've put in place over the last couple of decades. We started off automating individual large applications, but then we got specialist products like business process management, enterprise service buses, and of course we wrote lots of custom glue code to make sure that everything worked together. And this worked very effectively for quite a long time. The problem is it's ended up being complex and things are quite tightly integrated. And the net result of that is we actually often deliver change that's much slower than we'd like. And that can be a real problem with the speed of change that many businesses are expecting today. Of course, we've all heard about AI. AI is currently the darling of the markets. It's everyone's favorite automation solution. And it's rapidly heading up the hype curve where everyone's talking about it. But of course, this is also leading to what I like to call the AI fable. We've all heard the story. You've got problems. We've got AI. If you put the two together, you're just going to get instant success. Of course, in reality, it's never that simple. What normally happens is this ends up in disappointment with overreaching expectations and a capability that can't possibly deliver. In fact, modern automation involves many different aspects. We think it includes machine learning, which is a kind of AI, robotic process automation, bot technology, and natural language processing. An effective automation technology tends to be a blend of technologies to allow these things to work together to create the right solution for a particular situation. But of course, it has to be built on something. The strong engineering underpinnings that have always been important for automation integration are still very important. We need architecture for reliable, holistic solutions. And we need software engineering to make sure that we're delivering effective, sustainable, deliverable, operable systems. But even more fundamental than that, what are we automating? We're nearly always automating a complex enterprise process. We've got to understand those and hopefully simplify them as much as we can. And this nearly always requires really good data to describe the processes. All of this is fundamental work we've been doing for a very long time. In summary, effective modern automation is an awful lot more than the machine learning that so many people are talking about today. That said, we think AI is a very useful tool. It can deliver great results today and it shows huge potential for future applications. AI is actually a huge field. It goes back to the 1960s. People talk about AI today. They nearly always mean machine learning. And when you really boil it down behind the complex mathematics and the advanced technology, machine learning is essentially statistical pattern matching, usually based on big data sets, be that documents, numeric data sets, maybe even images or audio. It's all pattern matching. That sounds quite limiting, but it actually turns out pattern matching is very useful. It allows us to do text recognition and natural language processing. For example, we've done sophisticated document processing solutions for banks and insurers to allow them to unlock the information that's held in their scanned documents. It allows us to understand and optimize processes by looking at the data they produce over a long period. It allows us to predict behavior, both inside our organizations and from our clients and customers. And many other useful tasks that today need a human involved, maybe trend analysis, advanced kinds of information searching, or just generally things that require judgment or heuristic analysis. That said, machine learning is being industrialized for useful applications right across the industry. We've got open source frameworks, commercial tools, cloud services from all the big providers, and indeed we've got packaged products that at their core are machine learning applications. Machine learning, though, is not the only game in town. It's certainly not the only important thing, as we've said. Another emerging technology we think has great potential is robotic process automation. And funnily enough, it's built on underpinnings that have been around a long time too. It really combines technology from user interface testing, how you drive a user interface, and business process management technologies, how you describe a structured process graphically. And the point of RPA is that it allows us to automate applications straight through their user interface. And this gives us options in cases where we couldn't automate before. Generally, when we do automation, we'd like there to be an application programming interface, an API, so we can call it with code. And in our opinion, in fact, many of the RPA vendors who we talk to, that's nearly always the best bet, but you often haven't got one. Packaged software often doesn't have an API. Maybe you'd like to build an API, but actually it's a big job. The return on investment isn't clear. Or maybe you are actually going to have an API someday, but no time soon, and you can't do anything until you get it. And RPA can allow us to do quite sophisticated automation in all of these cases. The other thing we notice in most large organizations is the amount of repetitive, boring manual work people have to do. You've got people retyping information, comparing information in different places, running routine reports, checking whether things have completed, checking data in systems, raising alerts, sending emails when things don't work. It's all structured, it's not very interesting, and the individual tasks are often very low value. And it's really not work that humans are even very good at. So RPA can give us an example here. For example, we recently did a project for a large insurance broking organization where they had the same reference data in a couple of different systems, and they updated it by sending an Excel spreadsheet with lots of changes in it to people who then had to type it in multiple times. So we built a clever little RPA robot that reads the spreadsheet and updates the systems. Huge cost saving, but also releases people to do far more interesting work and is far more reliable and cost effective. You also tend to find information trapped in unstructured and informal data sources right across our organization. We've all seen it. We're meant to have everything in the corporate databases, but we've got stuff in forms. Everyone's got a few spreadsheets. We've got lots of PDFs. And RPA tools can extract the data from these kind of sources, unlock it, and allow it to drive a process. Or in fact, it can simply push it into enterprise applications, where it can then be used by other processes. Tremendously useful stuff. And then a third area, along with machine learning and robotic process automation that we're quite excited about, is bot technology. We've all become quite familiar with interactive text interfaces through messaging services in the last few years, but now we're starting to attach it to automated services at the back end. And what this really means is that we're using natural language processing, and we gain a natural language interface to our systems and automation. This gives us new, much more natural interaction styles, and it allows systems to be used more easily and maybe in new situations that we couldn't before. It just opens new possibilities where a traditional fixed user interface just really doesn't work very well for us. To build bots today is much simpler than it used to be. There's lots of open source and commercial frameworks. The cloud services have all got bot technology available, and developers are becoming very familiar with it. Natural language interfaces used to be a huge challenge, but today there are toolkits that can provide us with everything we need to build natural language interfaces relatively quickly. And these can give us much more natural interfaces to processes. For example, we built a bot for a major cloud provider to allow them to automate the process of people buying some of the cloud services. It was a question and answer kind of routine that a human being at a call center had to do before, and this allowed customers to do it via a bot. So what we're really doing is we're removing one of the interaction barriers. It's not always appropriate for a fixed graphical user interface, and this gives us the ability to do automation in lots of different situations like help desks and customer assistance, adaptive processes, and things like that. However, before we get too excited by all this, or maybe overwhelmed by the fact it all seems to be new, let's just stop. Remember that much of what we've done already, and much of what we know already, is still very much part of automation today. AI doesn't sweep away everything that came before it. All of the factors involved in automation aren't new. Much of what we know already is actually completely essential for success. We've still got to be good architects. We've still got to do good software engineering. All the stuff needs tested. We're still going to have to operate it. And we know how to do all that. A lot of what people have been doing for years can be built upon. As we've said, a lot of automation relies on good, clean, well-understood data, which is something many IT groups have been working on for a long time. We need our domain knowledge, and our fundamental architecture and design skills aren't going to go away. They're just as important as they are, as they always have been. What we're really doing today is we're blending some new technology, some older technologies in new ways, and making sure that we understand the problem, and that's what's creating success. So why are we so interested in automation? What's the current interest in it? Fundamentally, it's about reducing organizational friction, by which I mean it's the inefficiency, the difficulties in getting things done, the repetition that everyone in large enterprises is so familiar with. And it tends to be caused by manually based processes or human beings having to do repetitive tasks in complex processes. Specifically, we're looking to increase efficiency. Can we do more without increasing the cost? Can we reduce the cost of some of our operations? Can we do bigger things than we could before? Can we process more transactions? Can we look after more clients? Can we deal with new countries of operation without having to employ lots more people to do it and creating lots more repetitive manual work? It also gives us increased transparency, a very beneficial side effect of automation that often isn't obvious until we've done a bit of it. Automated processes create a digital trail, a data trail of what they've done. We can analyze that and get a much better understanding of how well things are working and what people are doing to help us improve our organizations and make people's lives better. And finally, it's going to be easier to innovate. One of the problems with innovation in a large organization is the need to retrain hundreds of people to change the way that they do processes. If that's all automated, it's going to be much easier to update the automation software than to retrain hundreds of people. And maybe we can hide the innovations entirely and just make things better. So this all sounds great, but the question is, how do I actually get started and deliver something useful? Well, the key thing is, we don't start with a tool implementation project, which is a problem we've seen in many people who've tried automation. Step one is actually to involve the business, as is so often the key to successful organizational IT. It's their money, we're affecting their lives, it's their business that we're going to change. They need to be setting the priorities and helping us understand what's important, what's not important, what the possibilities are, and what their appetite for risk is. We also need to be architecture-led, as we so often have been historically, with good results. We need to create a holistic solution. It needs to be well integrated into the organization and not end up as a sort of isolated automation ghetto. And we need to build something sustainable that is there for the long term and that we can build upon. And all that's going to require a lot of software architecture work. We need to make sure that we're heading in the right direction and we're getting results. And that involves measurement. So we measure things so that we know we're improving, or we change what we're doing if we're not improving. So what do we care about? How do we measure it? And let's measure it before we start, during our process, and then on an ongoing basis to drive good results. We also want to make sure we don't fall down the rabbit hole of spending 2 years building something and then delivering it all at the end. Of course, it may take many years to automate all of our significant processes, but we need to get useful ideas done quickly so we get early feedback, we build credibility and trust with our business partners, and we fail fast if things are going wrong. And this nearly always involves focusing on the problem initially and not the technology. Automation, of course, involves technology. Some of it's really interesting, some of it's very effective, but the fundamental isn't the technology, it's the problem. So let's make sure we continue to focus on that all the way through. And where we're going to start is very important. Let's find a significant but not entirely critical first project. We don't want to do something trivial. If we do something trivial, we're not going to prove very much, and actually no one's going to be very interested. However, on the other hand, we don't want to take on a first project that could endanger the business if we have problems with the automation. So we need to find something important, but where if we do have a few problems, it's not going to cause us huge organizational risk. Thanks for your attention. Those are our thoughts on smart automation. we'd now like to take some questions, so please chat any questions you've got into the Q&A box that's in the web client, and then we'll kind of work through the questions and get through as many as we can in the time. So a few have appeared already. First one is, what are the key things we should consider before we think about automating a process with a technology like RPA? That's a great question, thank you. There's a number of things, clearly, but to summarize it to its essentials, we need to know what the value of automating the process is, so we know whether it's worth proceeding. We need to simplify the process as much as we can. And then we need to make sure that the requirements of the process are well suited to the particular technology, or probably blend of technologies, that we plan to use. So with RPA, for example, it's going to be structured processes which are reasonably predictable, they're very repeatable, and they're things that we need to drive through a user interface for good reason. And then once we've decided that we've got the right way forwards and that we can build this, maybe we do some prototyping, we need to consider how we're going to make it a sustainable solution. One of the problems we've seen with automation a couple of times is where you end up with these sort of automation ghettos, by which I mean isolated pieces of automation that often not very many people in the organization understand and aren't well connected to the rest of the organization. So the key thing here is its operation and ongoing maintenance. Who's responsible for it? How does its operation fit into all of the other parts of the operational environment? And what's going to happen when, for example, a change is needed or the software needs upgraded? So all of those factors are really pretty important before we embark on any kind of automation project. Second question from Theodora is, what sort of applications might you see bot technology being used for? Well, the interesting thing about bot technology really is that it changes the way that people interact with systems. So instead of it being largely the human being driving an interface and us having to change our interaction to suit the kind of interface we're being given, whether that's on our phone or it's a desktop web browser or whether it's a traditional thick client, bots provide us with a lot more flexibility, possibly at the cost of some complexity. So where you see bot technology being really useful is where people need to interact with a computer in a possibly unpredictable way, or certainly in a very variable way. Bots are great at unlocking options around question response, situations where there are many options to respond, or situations where the sophistication of the interface needed to capture all of the different cases would probably overwhelm the human being. And so just as wizards, for example, were a real innovation in making user interfaces simpler, bots can also provide an even more flexible approach to creating an adaptive user interface that allows us to walk a user through a process rather than needing the user to be either driven through it through a user interface or having to know what steps to follow. A third question from Erwan. Making business decisions involves gathering data using emerging technology, so you're well informed. How about EQ when it comes to automation? So I'm going to ask Erwan to type a bit more into the Q&A box, and we'll come back to this to say what EQ is there. Turkus has asked, for an AI training model, do you have AI algorithms specifically at Endava, or do you use other people's, such as Amazon's, Google's, and Microsoft's? We don't invent AI algorithms at Endava. We use AI in two different ways. You've named a number of the big cloud providers there. They provide pre-packaged services, both of somewhat generic AI algorithms, which you can apply to data sets, and also useful prepackaged services. We use all of those, and they're tremendously useful. We also use a number of open source based systems. One off the top of my head is Stanford NLP, and we use actually quite a number of packaged machine learning libraries. For example, we've used scikit-learn, all very standard stuff. We don't see the value at our position in the value chain being creating new AI technology. We could employ the people to do it, but honestly, there are better organizations to develop it. What we're really interested in is how can you apply it. So we're nearly always integrating packaged AI algorithms or packaged AI libraries from third-party providers. Andrea has asked, do you think bot technology might replace apps on mobile devices given they're so much easier to integrate and use? And the answer, in my opinion, is definitely yes. I think that once we have voice response bots, I think that will be a very, very obvious fit to mobile devices because they've all got microphones and people are used to talking into them. The barrier today perhaps is the fact that typing a lot on your mobile device is a little bit awkward. But if we can simplify the interaction to say the kind of interaction we might have on WhatsApp, then actually they're a really good fit for mobile devices because we can't put much on the mobile device screen, otherwise it becomes small and very difficult to use. So actually a bot type of interaction really works well. Suzanne's asked a great question, which is a non-technical one but really important. Do you feel the regulators are ready for this level of change? I'm not sure which industry you're in, Suzanne, but I'd say regulators in general are very aware of automation technology. I come from financial services, and I think the financial services regulators have been very used to automation in its generic sense for a very long time, but they certainly have nervousness around some kinds of today's automation. Things like RPA, they ask a lot of very good questions about what would happen if an error occurs in a very large bot deployment, if all of the bots error at once and effectively you lose your ability to process a particular kind of transaction. That obviously wouldn't really happen with humans. You could just tell them to change their behavior. And with AI, they're very concerned about being able to trace inputs to outputs, which actually with neural networks is very difficult. In a sense, we don't understand what a particular neural network is doing. What we know is that we can train it to perform in a certain way, but it can be quite difficult to predict how it performs on certain data sets. So I think that's where there are a lot of conversations to be had with regulators, and certainly the financial services regulatory environment, those discussions are ongoing right now, and regulators are still, I think, nervous about some kind of automation. Lubomir has asked, how would you convince companies to see the benefits of e-commerce? I think in most industries, it's a case of watching who else is in your industry. In most industries, there are entrants who are digitizing their processes, which I think is probably what we mean here by e-commerce. And I think that's probably a trend that you can see outside your company, and that's something your company probably needs to be thinking about as to how they're going to respond to that. Thanks, Eoin, for clarifying that. So you mean emotional intelligence. When we make a business decision, we gather data, and we can use emerging technology to do that, and that's all great. And Eoin points out that there's also emotional intelligence in business decision making. That's a great point. I think today, in the state of the art, quite honestly, I don't think that emotional intelligence is being taken into account in most AI systems. I'm not personally at the very forefront of AI, but in the journal articles that I read, I do see attempts being made to extend the very basic kinds of sentiment analysis we have today to recognize the emotions that humans are undergoing, and this sometimes is used to change the way that the systems respond to people. It's possible that that could feed into decision making, but right now I don't think there's an ability within the AI community to monitor emotions and emotional intelligence, or rather simulate emotional intelligence reliably, let alone feed it into business decision making. But it's a great question. It'll be interesting to see what happens in that area. Radu asks, what applications are targeted for voice controlled application? I think anything which looks like an interaction, as in the sort of interaction you might have with a human, which has now been automated, is an obvious target for voice-based interaction because we probably did voice-based interaction sometime before. But other applications where we might not have thought of them before are situations where it's either dangerous or inconvenient or just awkward for the human being to use a screen, a keyboard, a mouse, a touch screen to interact with the system. An obvious example of that is mobile phone controlling cars, which I realize is fairly primitive, but in many cars today you can press a button on the steering wheel and then you can ask the car to make phone calls. You can say call Paul, and it will find the first Paul in your phone book. It'll prompt, is it Paul Jeffries? And if it's Paul Jeffries, give it yes, and then it dials for you. So that's quite primitive, but I can see that there are lots of situations where using an interactive keyboard, a mouse, a touchscreen isn't practical, and then you could think about using voice control. Ines Adrian has asked that, or has commented really, that automation effort is something that could be included in the development team, or it could be outside the development team. What are my thoughts on keeping it separate or not? Great question. I generally view automation as part of a bigger solution. I hope that sort of came through, is that I think isolated automation by itself can solve an individual problem, but honestly, it's less likely to be effective than when it's integrated into a holistic solution. So although you'll definitely have people who specialize in the technologies, maybe specialize in the user experience around automation, specialize in perhaps understanding how to integrate automation technology, I think it firmly sits inside the software engineering organization. Okay, we're just at the end of our session, so I think we'll have to leave it there. Thank you all for your attention, but particularly thank you all who asked such good questions. They were really interesting, and hopefully the answers were interesting too. Thanks for your time this morning. We've been Endava.